Food prices are set to ease in most advanced economies next year, though the pace and extent of the slowdown will vary by country, with Canada remaining an outlier, according to a recent note by Capital Economics. Food inflation has been elevated in recent months in Japan, the United Kingdom and Canada, where it has made an unusually large contribution to overall consumer price inflation. In November, food inflation in Japan reached 6%, accounting for nearly 60% of total CPI inflation. Food inflation stood at 4.2% in both the UK and Canada, contributing about 20% and 30%, respectively, to their CPI baskets. By comparison, food inflation was lower in the United States at 2.6% and in the Eurozone at 2.4%, according to data cited from LSEG. Capital Economics said the strength in food prices this year partly reflects earlier increases in global agricultural commodity prices, which typically feed through to consumer prices with a long lag. Beef and coffee prices rose sharply after climate-related disruptions led to record-low cattle herds and poor coffee harvests. These global developments affected all advanced economies but do not fully explain why food inflation has been higher in Japan, the UK and Canada. Domestic supply shocks have played a significant role. In Japan, a surge in local rice prices followed poor domestic harvests, with the impact intensified by the relatively closed nature of the country's agricultural market. In Canada, extreme drought conditions in the prairie regions have driven up prices for meat, fruit and vegetables in recent months. Labor costs have also been an important factor in some countries. Capital Economics said labor shortages in the food industry have contributed to strong wage pressures in Japan and the UK. In the UK, the job vacancy rate in the food sector has risen this year even as vacancy rates have fallen in other sectors, keeping wage growth elevated. In Japan, firms in the food industry reported greater difficulty finding workers than at any point in the past 30 years. By contrast, food producers in the Eurozone reported that labor shortages are no more of a constraint than before the pandemic, and there have been no clear signs of a surge in food sector vacancies in the US or Canada. Government policies have added to cost pressures in Japan, and the UK minimum wage increases in both countries have been larger than in most other advanced economies. In Japan, the minimum wage recorded its largest annual rise in more than 4 decades. In the UK, 74% of food industry firms reported raising selling prices due to higher national insurance contributions. While central banks often focus on core inflation, which excludes food and energy, Capital Economics said the persistence of food inflation is likely to concern policymakers in Japan and the UK because part of the pressure is linked to labor market strains. The economists also noted that food prices tend to have an outsized influence on household inflation expectations, as food purchases are frequent and price changes are highly visible. Households' inflation expectations for 5 to 10 years ahead are particularly high in Japan and the UK and have risen in both countries since the start of the year. The good news for consumers and central banks is that food inflation is probably at or close to its peak in the UK and Japan, and will remain at more subdued levels in the US and Eurozone, Capital Economics said. Forecast declines in agricultural commodity prices point to easing food price pressures across most advanced economies in the coming years. Prices of commodities that surged earlier in the year, including sugar, cocoa and eggs in the US, have already started to fall. In addition, the recent exemption of 237 agricultural products from tariffs is expected to reduce some upward pressure on U.S. food prices. Food producer price inflation has also leveled off or begun to fall in most advanced economies. While wage pressures are expected to remain strong in Japan, Capital Economics said a loosening labor market in the UK should feed through to slower wage growth next year. Canada remains the main exception. Food inflation there is expected to stay elevated for longer, reflecting a rebound in food producer price inflation and the lingering effects of drought conditions. A spike in food inflation at the start of 2026 is expected to be temporary, linked to base effects from an earlier GST holiday, but underlying price pressures remain strong. Capital Economics expects food CPI inflation in most advanced economies to be around 2% by the end of 2026, while Canada's food inflation is projected to remain near 4%, keeping food prices a key source of overall inflation pressure there next year.